Take this and get out of here. Margaret's voice rang through the house as she thrust a stack of papers into my hands. Her eyes blazed with the kind of fury I'd seen only a few times before. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had always seen me as nothing more than a burden, just a simple housewife, in her eyes wasting away her son's hard-earned money. I could barely suppress the laughter bubbling up inside me. If only she knew the truth. I glanced down at the divorce papers she had so eagerly shoved at me and then looked back at her, trying my best to keep my composure. This woman, deceived by my husband's endless lies, had no idea who she was really dealing with. "Thank you," I said with a forced smile, turning on my heel and leaving the house without another word. As I stepped outside, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The thought sent a thrill through me. I was more than ready for what was coming. I'm Sarah, 26 years old, and far from the housewife my husband Andrew has portrayed me to be. I'm the CEO of a thriving online education business, one I built from the ground up to help people learn skills that enable them to work from home. Most of the day-to-day operations are handled by my team, allowing me to work at my own pace from the comfort of my luxurious home. Andrew and I got married 2 years ago. To everyone else, he's a high-ranking executive at a prestigious company. But in reality, he's just a contract worker, doing odd jobs and barely scraping by. Worse, he's been spinning a web of lies, telling people that I'm nothing more than a lazy housewife, contributing little to our household. At home, Andrew treats me like a servant, refusing to lift a finger to help with the chores, even though I'm the one who actually earns the bulk of our income. Out of respect for your husband, you should forgive a little white lie, he'd say, dismissing my concerns about the way he misrepresents our life. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had always been cold towards me, but her disdain reached new heights once Andrew started spreading his lies. "Why did my son marry a jobless woman like you?" she'd hiss during her unannounced visits. No matter how many times I tried to explain that I was the one working and paying most of the bills, she'd just laugh, saying, "You're probably just relaxing all day while my poor son works himself to the bone." I tried talking to Andrew about his mother's behavior, but he was dismissive, telling me to just ignore an old woman with too much time on her hands. Meanwhile, he continued to contribute a measly $500 towards our household expenses, keeping the rest of his earnings for himself. I, on the other hand, was paying the rent and covering nearly all our expenses, pouring about $4,500 into our household budget each month. Despite the mounting frustrations, I couldn't bring myself to file for divorce. After all, Andrew had been there for me once, back in our college days when I was being harassed by a classmate named Angela. She couldn't stand that I outperformed her in academics, and her relentless bullying made me dread going to class. But Andrew was there for me, supporting me through it all. He even encouraged me to start my business when I was on the brink of collapse from overwork at my first. Because of Andrew's support back then, I felt indebted to him, and it made me hesitate whenever I thought about ending our marriage. But everything changed the day I stumbled upon a shocking discovery. Scrolling through social media, I saw a post from Angela. Yes, the same Angela who had tormented me in college. She was flaunting a brand new designer handbag, accompanied by a caption that made my blood run cold. "My beloved boyfriend bought me this latest brand bag." The hand holding the bag was adorned with a watch, one I recognized all too well. It was the same luxury watch I had gifted Andrew, a limited edition no less. My heart sank. How could this be? Angela and Andrew. It didn't take long to piece together the puzzle. Angela must have known that Andrew and I were married. After all, we had mutual acquaintances on social media. Yet, here she was, brazenly flaunting her relationship with him, as if daring me to respond. I knew I had to act. I hired a private investigator to dig into Andrew's activities, and the results were exactly what I feared. Andrew wasn't attending business school like he claimed. He was spending his time and my money on luxurious outings with Angela. The betrayal cut deep, but instead of anger, I felt a strange sense of relief. This was my chance to finally break free. I secretly signed a lease for a new apartment and began moving my belongings out of our shared home, little by little. I was nearly ready to leave when Andrew announced, with a grin on his face, that he had been selected for an employee training camp and would be away for a week. I knew better. This was just another excuse to spend time with Angela. As soon as Andrew left for his so-called training camp, I was ready to finalize my plans. But just as I was packing the last of my things, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there, her face twisted with a mixture of triumph and disdain. "Look, Sarah, this is the latest handbag Andrew bought me," she said smugly, holding up the very bag I had seen on Angela's social media. "It's a thank you for always helping out." "What has Andrew given you recently?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "I haven't received anything," I replied calmly, though the irony of her words stung. "Of course not. You're living off my son's earnings without doing anything," she snapped. Then, without warning, she pulled out a set of divorce papers, already filled out and ready for my signature. "I never liked you," Margaret spat. "You've been living comfortably off Andrew's hard work without contributing a thing. Sign these papers and get out. We'll manage just fine without you." I could only feel pity for her. She had no idea that her precious son had been lying to her all along. I signed the papers without hesitation, packed up the last of my things and said, "Thank you for everything. I'll submit these myself," before walking out the door. Margaret must have expected me to beg or plead, but I just left, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. I submitted the divorce papers that very day, feeling lighter than I had in years. The next few days were blissful as I settled into my new luxurious apartment. I no longer had to deal with Andrew or his overbearing mother. My life was mine again, and I was excited to see what the future held. But my peace didn't last long. Just a few days later, Andrew called, his voice frantic. "Sarah, where the hell are you? Come back right now." "Why should I? Your mother told me to leave, so I did," I replied, amused by his panic. "What are you talking about? Just come back. No complaints." "No, Andrew, we're divorced now. I'm not coming back to a legal stranger's house." Andrew's voice wavered as he realized the gravity of the situation. "What divorce? This isn't valid. Just come back, please. There's only $500 left in the account, and I can't make ends meet." I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm not concerned about your living expenses anymore, Andrew. If you want to talk in the future, go through my lawyer." With that, I ended the call and turned off my phone, ready to move on with my life. But Andrew wasn't done. A few days later, I received a summons for a formal discussion through our lawyers. I arrived at the office to find not only Andrew but also Margaret waiting for me. Her eyes widened as she noticed the new handbag I was carrying, one far more luxurious than the one she had flaunted. "You have a good eye, Margaret," I said with a smile. "When you have money, you want to have at least one of these." Margaret looked down, and Andrew began to speak, his voice low and embarrassed. "Sarah, my mother prepared those divorce papers without my consent. I regret what happened. I know I've lied and let you down, but please come back and cancel the divorce." His words rang hollow. I could tell he didn't truly believe he had done anything wrong. He was just trying to shift the blame onto his mother. "I'm sorry, Andrew, but I can't come back," I said firmly. Andrew's demeanor changed in an instant. He slammed his fist on the desk and shouted, "It's thanks to me that you became a CEO? Don't you have any gratitude? I demand $1 million as compensation." This was the real Andrew, selfish, entitled, and desperate. Margaret tried to calm him down, but he was too far gone, ranting about how I had abandoned my duties as a wife and caused him and his mother emotional distress. The lawyer, clearly unimpressed, pulled out a document. "Sarah is willing to accept the divorce quietly and won't pursue this matter further," he said, handing the document to Andrew. Andrew's face turned pale as he read the evidence of his affair with Angela, complete with photos of the two of them together. "I'm grateful for your support in running the company, Andrew, but I've repaid my debt. You've enjoyed a luxurious life at my expense, and I won't stand for it any longer," I said, my voice steady. Andrew was speechless. Margaret, unaware of the affair, began to cause a scene, demanding answers, but I ignored her, turning to Andrew. "If you continue to make a fuss, I'll claim damages and send this evidence to your company." Andrew slumped in defeat. "I have no choice but to accept the divorce," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. As they left the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of closure wash over me, but the drama wasn't over yet. I sent the evidence of Andrew's affair to Angela, and she responded with a smug, "Oops, caught me, but Andrew's mine now. I'll pay the damages, whatever they are." It turned out that Andrew had lied to Angela too, making her believe he was a successful executive. When I informed her of the truth, her expression changed. Initially defiant, She soon realized the gravity of the situation and quickly settled the payment. Life moved on, and I thrived in my new independence. Andrew, on the other hand, struggled. Unable to pay rent, he returned to live with Margaret, and they both quickly sank into debt. Overworked and sleep-deprived, Andrew began to make mistakes at work, his life unraveling around him. One day, he sent me a message that made me laugh. "I've come to understand how much I value you, Sarah. Let's support each other from now on." I had no memory of ever receiving support from Andrew after our marriage, and his idea of mutual support was completely misplaced. I warned him through my lawyer that further contact would lead to sending evidence of the affair to his workplace. The messages stopped completely after that. Now, I'm working happily, expanding my business and enjoying my single life. I have no intention of remarrying anytime soon, and I'm finally free from the weight of a toxic marriage. As Sarah embraced her new life, the days passed in a blur of work, freedom, and quiet contentment. She spent her mornings leisurely, sipping coffee on the balcony of her luxurious apartment, overlooking the city that she now saw as a canvas full of endless possibilities. The afternoons were dedicated to expanding her business, meeting with clients and brainstorming new ideas that would push her company to new heights. Life, for the first time in years, felt like it truly belonged to her. But as the weeks went by, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the calm wouldn't last forever. Andrew's desperate attempts to contact her had ceased, but she knew he was still out there, struggling to put his life back together after their explosive divorce. And then there was Margaret, still reeling from the truth about her son, still clinging to the remnants of the life she had thought was so secure. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah was going through some files, she received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, she considered ignoring it, but something told her to answer. "Hello, Sarah speaking." "Sarah, it's Emily. Do you remember me?" Sarah's mind raced. Emily? The name was familiar, but from where? Then it clicked. Emily was one of her old college friends, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. "Emily, of course I remember. How have you been?" Sarah replied, her tone warm but cautious. "I'm doing well, thanks. Listen, I know this might seem out of the blue, but I heard about what happened with you and Andrew. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." The concern in Emily's voice was genuine, and Sarah felt a small wave of relief. It was nice to know that someone outside of her immediate circle cared. "I'm doing fine, actually. Better than I have in a long time," Sarah said, surprising herself with the honesty in her words. "I'm glad to hear that," Emily responded. There was a pause before she continued, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "But Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Andrew and Angela." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What about them?" "Andrew's in trouble. Serious trouble. He's been trying to keep it under wraps, but it's all starting to unravel. And Angela, well, she's not who she says she is." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "I can't say too much over the phone. Can we meet? I think it's something you need to hear in person." Sarah agreed, her mind buzzing with questions. What could Emily possibly know that would change things now? She thought she was done with Andrew and Angela, but it seemed the past wasn't ready to let her go just yet. They arranged to meet the next day at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Sarah arrived early, her nerves on edge. The rain had cleared, but the sky was still overcast, casting a gray hue over everything. When Emily arrived, she looked just as Sarah remembered, soft-spoken, with a calm demeanor that had always made her easy to talk to. But today, there was an urgency in her eyes that Sarah hadn't seen before. After ordering their drinks, Emily wasted no time getting to the point. "Sarah, I know you've moved on, but you need to know what's happening. Andrew is being investigated by his company. They're onto his financial mismanagement, and they found out about his affair with Angela. It's only a matter of time before everything comes crashing down." Sarah wasn't surprised to hear about Andrew's troubles. In fact, she had expected it, but Emily's next words caught her off guard. "Angela isn't just some random woman, Sarah. She's been playing Andrew and others for a long time. She's been involved in several scandals, using men to climb the social ladder and gain access to wealth. She targets successful or connected individuals, and once she's gotten what she wants, she moves on." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Angela had been a thorn in her side since college, but she had never imagined that the woman was so calculated, so ruthless. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're not the only one she's targeted. Andrew isn't her first, and he won't be her last. I've heard rumors that she's planning something bigger, something that could bring down a lot of people, and I thought you should know." Sarah's mind raced. She had distanced herself from Andrew, but now it seemed she was being pulled back into his world, into a web of deceit and danger that she hadn't anticipated. "What should I do?" Sarah asked, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Emily leaned in, her voice serious. "Stay as far away from them as possible. Whatever Angela's planning, it's not something you want to get caught up in. And if Andrew tries to contact you again, be very careful. He's desperate, and desperate people do reckless." Sarah nodded, her thoughts spinning. She had thought the drama was over, that she could finally move on. But now it seemed there were more layers to uncover, more truths that had been hidden from her. As they parted ways, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test her resolve and force her to confront the past she thought she had left behind. Over the next few weeks, Sarah kept a low profile. She focused on her business, but her mind kept drifting back to Emily's warning. She couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease, as if something was lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. Then, one evening, as Sarah was wrapping up work, she received another call, this time from a blocked number. Hesitating for a moment, she answered, her heart pounding. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, and then a familiar voice spoke. "Sarah, it's Andrew. We need to talk." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Andrew, there's nothing left to say. Our divorce is final, and I don't want anything to do with you." "I know, but this is important. Please, just hear me out." Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to meet him. She chose a public place, knowing she couldn't trust him to be rational or calm. They met at a park, near a bench by the lake. Andrew looked haggard, his once confident demeanor replaced by desperation and fear. "Sarah, I'm in deep trouble," he began, his voice shaking. "The company is onto me, and they've frozen my accounts. Angela has disappeared, and I have no idea where she is. I'm being set up, Sarah. I need your help." Sarah felt a surge of anger. "You're being set up? Andrew, you did this to yourself. You lied, you cheated, and now you're paying the price. Why should I help you?" "Because you're the only one I have left," Andrew pleaded, his eyes filled with desperation. "Please, Sarah, I'm begging you." But Sarah had heard enough. "Andrew, this is your mess, not mine. I'm done cleaning up after you. I suggest you get yourself a lawyer, someone better than the one you had before, and don't contact me again." She turned to leave, but Andrew grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "You don't understand, Sarah. This isn't just about me. Angela, she's dangerous. She's involved in something much bigger, something that could ruin both of us if it comes out. Please, help me find her. We can stop this together." Sarah wrenched her arm free, her heart pounding. "I'm not getting involved, Andrew. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Goodbye." With that, she walked away, leaving Andrew standing alone by the lake, his pleas echoing in her ears. But as she walked, a nagging doubt crept into her mind. What if Andrew was right? What if Angela was more dangerous than she had realized? Days turned into weeks, and Sarah tried to push the encounter out of her mind. But it wasn't long before news broke. Andrew had been arrested. The charges were serious: embezzlement, fraud, and connections to a criminal enterprise. The media had a field day, and Sarah's name was inevitably dragged into the scandal, though she had done nothing wrong. The final blow came when Angela's true identity was revealed. She had been using multiple aliases, running cons on wealthy men across the country, and now she was on the run, her whereabouts unknown. Sarah's life was turned upside down as reporters camped outside her apartment, and her business partners began to question her involvement in the scandal. It was all she could do to keep her business afloat while trying to clear her name. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, exhausted from the day's events, there was a knock on her door. Her heart raced. She wasn't expecting anyone. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was Emily. Sarah quickly opened the door, relief flooding through her. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Emily stepped inside, her face grim. "Sarah, I'm sorry to come unannounced, but there's something you need to know. I've been doing some digging and I found out more about Angela. It's worse than we thought." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What is it?" "She's connected to a network of criminals, people who are willing to do anything to protect their interests. Andrew got involved without realizing who he was dealing with, and now that everything's falling apart, they might come after you too. You need to be careful." Fear gripped Sarah. She had thought she was done with this nightmare, but it seemed she was only at the beginning. "What should I do?" "You need to go to the authorities, tell them everything you know, and whatever you do, don't trust anyone connected to Andrew or Angela. They're not who they seem." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She had to act fast if she wanted to protect herself and her business. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of a fight for her survival, a fight she couldn't afford to lose. As Emily left, Sarah locked the door behind her, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. She wasn't going to let Angela or Andrew destroy the life she had built, but to do that, she would have to confront the demons from her past and face the darkness that had been lurking just out of sight. With a deep breath, Sarah began to make her plans. She would fight back, but this time, she would be prepared for whatever came her way. And as she sat down to map out her next steps, she couldn't help but wonder, how far would she have to go to finally be free of the ghosts that haunted her? The night was still, the city lights flickering outside Sarah's window as she sat in her living room, contemplating her next move. Emily's warning echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that the danger she was facing was real and closer than she had ever imagined. The first thing she did was contact her lawyer, the same one who had helped her with the divorce. They spoke for hours, discussing the implications of Andrew's arrest and Angela's involvement in a criminal network. The lawyer advised her to go to the authorities immediately to get ahead of any potential threats or accusations. The following morning, Sarah made her way to the police station. The building loomed over her as she approached, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders. Inside, she was greeted by a stern-looking detective who led her into a small, dimly lit room. Detective Harper, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat across from her. "Miss Carter," she began, her voice steady. "We've been expecting you. Please, tell us everything you know." Sarah took a deep breath, recounting everything from the beginning. Her marriage to Andrew, the discovery of his affair with Angela, the divorce, and finally the revelations that Emily had shared with her. As she spoke, she watched Detective Harper's expression remain unreadable, her pen moving quickly across her notebook. When Sarah finished, the detective leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she considered the information. "Thank you, Miss Carter. What you've told us confirms some of what we've already suspected. Angela, whose real name is Veronica Lane, is indeed part of a criminal organization that's been under investigation for some time. Your ex-husband, Andrew, got caught up in their schemes, and now that he's been arrested, it's likely that they'll do whatever it takes to cover their tracks." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "Am I in danger?" Detective Harper's gaze softened slightly. "We don't have any concrete evidence that you're a target, but it's better to be safe. We'll provide protection for you, and I'd advise you to keep a low profile for the time being. If you notice anything suspicious, anything at all, contact us immediately." The reality of the situation hit Sarah like a cold wave. Her life, which she had thought was finally under her control, was slipping into chaos once again. But there was no time to dwell on the fear. She had to stay focused, stay strong. "Thank you, Detective," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the anxiety gnawing at her insides. "I'll do whatever it takes to stay safe." As she left the police station, a sense of unease settled over her. The city that once felt like her sanctuary now seemed filled with shadows, each corner hiding potential threats. But Sarah refused to let fear paralyze her. She was determined to take control of her destiny, no matter what it took. Over the next few days, Sarah followed the detective's advice. She avoided unnecessary outings, changed her daily routine, and kept in close contact with her lawyer. The police assigned an officer to discreetly watch over her apartment building, and while it provided some comfort, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming on the horizon. It wasn't long before that feeling proved true. One evening, as Sarah was preparing dinner, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Her breath caught as she read the message. "You should have stayed out of this. Now it's too late." Her hands trembled as she stared at the words. The threat was clear, and it was coming from someone who knew exactly how to reach her. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She immediately called Detective Harper, reporting the message. Within minutes, the police were at her door. They took the threat seriously, increasing surveillance and advising Sarah to stay indoors until they could trace the source of the message. But even as they assured her that they were doing everything they could, Sarah knew that Veronica Angela wasn't someone who would back down easily. The criminal network she was involved with was dangerous, and now that Sarah had been dragged into their world, there was no telling what lengths they would go to silence her. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and tension. Sarah barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities of what could happen next. The police continued their investigation, but progress was slow. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt into her throat, fearing another message. Then, one night, it happened. Sarah had just drifted off to sleep when the sound of breaking glass jolted her awake. Her heart pounded as she sat up in bed, straining to listen. There was another crash, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was in her apartment. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering her address into the phone as she quietly moved towards the bedroom door. But before she could reach it, the door was kicked open with a loud bang, and two men stormed into the room. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, Veronica's accomplice, a man she had seen in the background of photos with Andrew. His eyes were cold, calculating, as he advanced towards her. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice laced with menace, "you should have listened to the warning." Sarah backed away, her mind racing for a way out. The other man moved to block the door, cutting off her escape. "I don't want any trouble," Sarah managed to say, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay strong. The man smiled, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down her spine. Too late for that. As they advanced, Sarah's instincts kicked in. She grabbed the nearest object, a lamp from the bedside table, and swung it with all her strength. The lamp connected with the first man's head, and he stumbled back, cursing in pain. But the second man was quick. He lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. Sarah fought back with everything she had, but he was stronger, pinning her down as she struggled to break free. "Hold still," he snarled, his grip tightening on her wrists. Just as Sarah felt herself losing hope, there was a loud crash from the living room. The men froze, their attention snapping towards the sound. In the confusion, Sarah managed to free one of her hands and reach for her phone, which had fallen to the floor. Before she could dial again, the door to her bedroom burst open and Detective Harper stormed in, her gun drawn. "Freeze!" she shouted, her voice commanding and full of authority. The men hesitated, but the sight of the gun made them reconsider their options. They raised their hands slowly, stepping away from Sarah. Within moments, more officers flooded the room, subduing the intruders and cuffing them. Sarah lay on the floor, her body trembling with adrenaline and fear. Detective Harper knelt beside her, helping her to sit up. "Are you okay?" Harper asked, her tone softer now. Sarah nodded, though she was still in shock. "I think so, thank you." Harper gave her a reassuring smile. "You did well, Sarah. It's over now. You're safe." But even as Harper said the words, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of a long road ahead. Veronica was still out there, and until she was caught, Sarah wouldn't truly feel safe. The next few days were a whirlwind of police reports, questioning, and attempts to piece together the extent of the criminal network that Veronica had been a part of. The men who had broken into Sarah's apartment refused to talk, but the police were confident they could track Veronica down, now that they had leads to follow. Sarah's life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. She resumed her work, though her focus was often interrupted by the lingering fear that someone was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Then, one day, she received a call from Detective Harper. "We've got her," Harper said, the relief in her voice palpable. "Veronica's been arrested. She was trying to leave the country, but we intercepted her at the airport." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was finally over. The woman who had caused so much chaos in her life was in custody, and Sarah could begin to rebuild her life without the constant shadow of fear. But as she hung up the phone, Sarah knew that she had been changed by the experience. She was stronger now, more resilient, but also more cautious. She had learned the hard way that trust was something to be earned, not given lightly. In the weeks that followed, Sarah focused on her business, pouring her energy into expanding her company and creating new opportunities for others. She moved to a new apartment, one with better security, and started to rebuild the life she had fought so hard to protect. Andrew's trial came and went, and he was sentenced to several years in prison for his crimes. Veronica, too, faced justice for her role in the criminal organization. The media frenzy died down, and Sarah was finally able to breathe easy, knowing that the worst was behind her. As she sat in her new office, overlooking the city that had once felt so threatening, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had been through hell and back, but she had emerged stronger, more determined than ever to live her life on her own terms. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. This was her life, and she was in control, no one else. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, and Sarah Carter was ready to embrace the future with open arms.